The advertisement for Oak Creek Ranchettes had sold a dream woven from words like serenity, community, and sanctuary. For me, those weren't marketing buzzwords. They were the essential components of a life I was trying to rebuild. My wife, Sarah, had found the listing, her finger tracing the 30-acre plot on the edge of the state forest. A forever home. Marcus, she'd said, her voice a fragile whisper against the hum of the hospital machines. A place to finally stop building walls for other people and just live within your own. After she was gone, fulfilling that shared dream felt like the only way to keep a part of her with me. I bought the land, brought my 2 horses, my old dog Buster, and the ghosts of 1,000 high-stress deadlines and projects in far-flung, dangerous places. I came here for peace. The first sign that community was a loaded term in Oak Creek arrived a week after the moving trucks left. It came in the form of a woman whose posture was so rigid it seemed to defy the laws of anatomy. I was hauling a 50-pound feed sack from my truck bed, the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun, when a sterile white SUV glided to a halt at the foot of my long gravel driveway. Out stepped a woman with a helmet of blonde hair, shellacked into a state of immovable perfection, and a face pulled so taut it seemed to challenge the structural integrity of her own skin. She wore crisp white capris and a navy blue polo shirt, a small embroidered oak leaf stitched over her heart. Mr. Thorne. Her voice sliced through the country quiet, a jarring blend of forced hospitality and the unmistakable tone of someone used to giving orders. I dropped the feed sack, wiping my dusty hands on my jeans as I walked to meet her. Buster, my aging golden retriever, trotted faithfully at my side. That's me. Something I can help you with. Brenda Dixon, she stated, as if announcing her own coronation. She made no move to shake my hand. I am the president of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. The way she said president was imbued with a gravitas that suggested it was a position of national importance. Her gaze drifted past me, her eyes narrowing on a point near the road. A tiny muscle in her jaw twitched. Her lips, a severe slash of coral lipstick, thinned into a line of disapproval. I'm here to personally deliver your welcome packet, she said, thrusting a thick, 3-ring binder at me. It contains our covenants, conditions, and restrictions the CC&Rs. We find that adherence to these bylaws is the cornerstone of maintaining our community's aesthetic integrity and, of course, our property values. Right. Thanks, I said, the binder's weight feeling symbolic. And, she continued, the pleasantries now dispensed with, while I am here, I must address a rather glaring and immediate violation. She raised a perfectly manicured finger, the nail a polished talon, and pointed toward my mailbox. It was a standard, heavy-duty black metal box on a solid 444 wooden post, sunk deep in the ground, a veteran of a decade at my last place. That mailbox is non-compliant. I blinked, processing the sheer pettiness of the accusation. It's a mailbox. It's regulation size. The postman doesn't have a problem with it. The United States Postal Service is not the governing body of this community. Mr. Thorne. I am, she snapped, the veneer of civility flaking away. Article 5, Section 3 of the bylaws you have a legal duty to uphold clearly stipulates that all mail receptacles must be the heritage model in forest green, purchased exclusively from our approved vendor. This ensures a harmonious and uniform streetscape. Your rustic fixture is an eyesore, and it must be rectified within 14 days. I looked from my perfectly functional, sturdy mailbox back to her unblinking, reptilian stare. I was a man who had designed blast-proof curtain walls for embassies in war zones. I had calculated the seismic load tolerances for subterranean command centers and argued the merits of high-tensile steel with four-star generals. To be standing here, in my own driveway, being lectured on the aesthetic harmony of mailboxes, was an absurdity so profound it was almost comical. With all due respect, Mrs. Dixon, it's a box on a stick. It is Brenda, she corrected, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. And it is the very first impression your property makes. It is the proverbial broken window that leads to neighborhood decay. We maintain standards here, Mr. Thorne. This is not some ramshackle farm. Her eyes swept over my dusty boots, my feed-stained jeans, and the half-restored barn in the distance. Her expression, one of profound disdain. You will find the violation notice, along with the order form for the correct mailbox, within the welcome packet. The clock is ticking. 14 days. Without another word, she pivoted on her heel, returned to her climate-controlled SUV, and drove away, leaving a plume of dust to settle in her wake. Buster let out a low whine, pressing his head against my leg, as if to offer moral support. I looked at my mailbox, a symbol of simple, robust utility, and saw it through her eyes, a declaration of war. I opened the heavy binder. Clipped to the first page was a laminated sheet, the header printed in an aggressive red font, official notice of violation. My name and address were listed below, followed by the clinical description of my crime installation of non-compliant mail receptacle. Sarah had wanted peace. It seemed I had instead purchased a front-row seat to a petty tyrant's pathetic little power game. This was my forever home, and I had arrived to find it was already occupied territory. The opening shot in the battle for my own sanctuary had just been fired, not with a cannon, but with a piece of paper about a mailbox. It felt ridiculous, but as I recalled the cold, controlling fury in Brenda Dixon's eyes, I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. In the interest of a peaceful start, I capitulated. It felt like appeasement, but I reasoned that a quiet life was worth the price of a ridiculous mailbox. I called the exclusive approved vendor, a company whose address curiously matched that of a landscaping business owned by one Gary Dixon, and paid a galling $325 for the Heritage model. When it arrived, it was even flimsier than I'd imagined. The post was a hollow aluminum tube. The box itself was made of metal so thin I could flex it with my thumb, and the whole assembly was anchored by a pathetic little stake you hammered into the ground. It wobbled in a stiff breeze, but it was forest green, and it was compliant. I thought that would be the end of it. How naive I was. That was merely Brenda proving my tractability. Now the real campaign began. A death by 1,000 paper cuts. The violation notices became a regular feature in my new, flimsy mailbox. My trash cans were visible from the street for an excess duration post pickup. The truck came at 7 a.m. I received the email violation, complete with a time-stamped photo, at 11:30 a.m. I had been on the far side of my 30 acres, mending a fence. The fine was $50. Another notice cited the paint on my historic barn. The classic red, it turned out, was not an approved earth tone from the HOA's pre-selected palette of beige, grayish, and taupe. The fine was $100. Each notice came with an invitation to appeal before the Architectural Control Committee, the ACC. I attended the first one, about the trash cans, held in the Dixons' meticulously organized garage. 3 directors' chairs were set up behind a folding table, facing a single, smaller chair for the accused. It was a suburban inquisition. Brenda presided, with her husband Gary, a beefy, scowling man, in a matching HOA polo, acting as her silent, intimidating sergeant-at-arms. The third member was a woman named Carol, whose terrified eyes darted around the room as if seeking an escape route. "Mr. Thorne," Brenda began, reviewing a file with my name on it. "The CC&Rs are quite clear on the matter of refuse containers. Punctuality in these matters reflects one's respect for the community." "I respect the community," I said, my voice calm and even. "I also have a 30-acre property to manage. I was working. It took me a few hours to get back to the house." Gary grunted, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. "Rules are rules. Excuses don't maintain property values." "A 4-hour window seems punitive," I argued. "What about residents who work day shifts?" Brenda bestowed upon me a smile that was all teeth. "Responsible homeowners make arrangements. Mr. Thorne, this is not a difficult concept." I was fined $50. I didn't bother appealing the barn paint violation. I just mailed a check. I was still operating under the delusion that if I paid their stupid fines, they'd eventually leave me alone. Amidst this siege of pettiness, I found solace in my work and in my past. The ranch was a complex engineering project of its own: irrigation, structural repairs, land management, and I kept in touch with my old world. "Dave, it's Marcus," I'd say, walking the pasture with my phone to my ear. The familiar jargon a comfort. "On that Jakarta project, tell the new guy to double-check the specs on the blast-resistant glazing. The manufacturer's tensile strength claims are optimistic. And run a new GPR survey on the perimeter. Trust me, you don't want to find a sinkhole after the foundation is poured." On my mantel, next to a photo of Sarah and me, was one of a younger, dust-covered version of myself, grinning alongside a team in front of a massive, newly completed dam. We looked proud, exhausted, and accomplished. We had solved real problems. Here, the problems were invented, manufactured by a bored woman with a clipboard. The first escalation from paper to physical aggression came about a month after the barn notice. I found my compliant mailbox dented, a long, white scrape down its side. The hollow post bent at a sharp angle. It looked like a vehicle had swiped it. An accident, perhaps. I spent an hour straightening the post and hammering out the dent as best I could. I reported it to the HOA, as required. Brenda's emailed response was chillingly dismissive. She informed me that, since it was my property, it was my responsibility to repair it in a timely manner, or I would be fined for having an unsightly fixture. My gut, an instinct honed by decades of risk assessment, told me it was no accident. The impact vector was too clean, the height of the scrape too consistent. It felt like a deliberate nudge. 2 weeks later, the nudge became a shove. The mailbox wasn't just bent, it was flattened. The post was snapped clean off at the base. The green box lay crushed in the grass. This was intentional. This was vandalism. A hot, clean anger burned through me. This was my home, my sanctuary. That evening, I did something I knew would be necessary. I called a number from an old business card. "Ms. Evans, Marcus Thorne here. We worked together on the State Department's risk assessment for the Bogota compound about a decade ago. I find myself in need of some legal advice on a domestic matter." I drove to her Austin office the next day. Anya Evans was exactly as I remembered: sharp, impeccably dressed, with a mind that moved like a cheetah. I laid out the binder of violations, the photos of the vandalism, the emails. She listened intently, her fingers steepled. "Okay, Marcus, what you have here is a classic harassment campaign by a tin-pot dictator. The problem is, on paper, she's following the bylaws, however absurd they may be. The vandalism is your strong point. But it's circumstantial. You suspect Gary Dixon's truck, but you can't prove it. Not yet. So, what are my options? I asked. I'm an engineer. I solve problems. My instinct is to build a mailbox they physically cannot destroy. Anya leaned forward, a serious look on her face. That's an interesting instinct. But we have to be very careful. We're in Texas, a state that respects property rights. But the law draws a very bright line between passive defense and setting a trap. You build a mailbox that, say, deploys spikes when hit. You're liable. If Gary hits your indestructible mailbox and breaks his wrist on the steering wheel, his scummy lawyer will argue you created an intentional hazard. A man-trap. We need to make this defensive, not offensive. The response must be proportional and visibly static. So, a fortress mailbox is feasible. Feasible and legal, if we do it right, she confirmed. It must be a permanent fixture, and its strength must be inherent, not reactive. But before you do that, we take the first legal step. We establish a formal record that they are on notice. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter. It will be delivered via certified mail to every member of the HOA board. It will detail the pattern of harassment, the suspected vandalism, and state in no uncertain terms that they are to cease all non-essential communication, and that any further damage to your property or false reports to authorities will be met with immediate legal action. You think that will stop them? Anya laughed. A short, sharp sound. God. No. People like this see a lawyer's letter as a challenge. It will make them escalate. And when they do, they will be doing so after being formally warned. They'll be knowingly and willfully violating the law. That's when they hand us the rope to hang them with. So go home, install some cameras, and wait. Let them make the next move. I left her office feeling a sense of clarity. The anger had been replaced by cold purpose. This was now a strategic operation. I was no longer just a resident. I was a client. And Brenda Dixon was no longer just a nuisance. She was the opposing party in a legal conflict. As advised, I installed a series of discrete, high-resolution cameras covering my property line, including one focused squarely on the mailbox. I replaced the flattened mailbox with another identical, flimsy one. I was baiting the trap, a trap that was perfectly legal, advised by counsel, and designed not to harm, but to reveal. I was no longer just reacting. I was setting the stage. The cease and desist letter, as Anya predicted, was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The petty violation notices stopped, but the atmosphere grew colder, more menacing. The slander, however, went into overdrive. On the community forum, Brenda posted a heavily redacted version of Anya's letter, framing it as a shocking, litigious attack from an uncooperative resident. It has come to my attention, she wrote, that a certain new homeowner has threatened our community with legal action simply for trying to uphold the standards we all cherish. It's a sad day when a neighbor chooses lawyers over a simple conversation. The comments were a cesspool of her supporters' outrage. They called me aggressive, litigious, not a good fit for the community. They were building their narrative, and I was the designated villain. The deeper reasons for Brenda's obsessive need for control started to surface in the gossip. I overheard a conversation at the feed store. Brenda's been impossible ever since Omnicorp downsized her department. One woman said to another, she was a regional manager for 20 years. That HOA is the only thing she has left to run. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a motive. This wasn't about property values. It was about her own shattered sense of self-worth. This little fiefdom was all she had. Her husband, Gary, was a simpler creature. His motivation was the simple pleasure of bullying. He made a point of driving his F-250 past my property several times a day, his engine rumbling, a smug look on his face. He knew I suspected him, and he enjoyed it. The lack of a new violation notice seemed to frustrate them, so they escalated, moving to weaponize the authorities, just as Anya had anticipated. The county sheriff's deputy who showed up was young and looked profoundly tired. "Sir, we received an anonymous complaint about an illegal commercial breeding operation. I led him to my barn, where my 2 horses, including my pregnant mare, Willow, stood peacefully in their stalls. 2 horses. Deputy. Hardly a commercial operation." He sighed, nodding. "We know. Sir, we have your address flagged. This is the 3rd call this month. Last week it was illegal dumping your compost pile. Before that, an unlicensed kennel, your 1 dog. They're wasting our time, but the calls are phrased in a way that requires a response. They know the buzzwords." He lowered his voice. "Frankly, we're building a file on the source of the calls too. You have our number. If the harassment becomes direct, you call us." The visit was their critical error. The official report from the sheriff's office, noting a pattern of baseless complaints originating from the same area, became Exhibit B in Anya's growing file. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that moved the case from civil harassment to criminal intimidation, came a week later. I was checking the fence line near the road when Gary pulled his truck over. He didn't get out, just rolled down the window, his elbow resting on the frame. "Got your lawyer letter, Thorne," he sneered. "Real tough guy, hiding behind some woman in a skirt." The letter was clear. "Gary, you are to have no contact with me." "Oh, I'm just being neighborly," he said, his eyes drifting past me to the pasture where Willow was grazing peacefully. "That's a beautiful horse. Pregnant, isn't she? Be a real shame if something spooked her. A loud noise, maybe. A backfire. A spooked horse can do stupid things. Run right through a fence. Right out into the road." The threat was unmistakable, and it was aimed at the most vulnerable thing in my life. The cold purpose within me solidified into something as hard and dense as granite. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, my expression unreadable. My hand was in my pocket, my thumb pressed against the side of my phone, where a recording app was actively capturing every single word. He mistook my silence for fear. He chuckled and drove off. I immediately called Anya. "I've got him," I said. "He just threatened my horse, and I have it on tape." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Anya's voice, sharp and focused. "Okay, Marcus, this is it. We file for an emergency protective order tomorrow morning. And now you can build your mailbox." The project was no longer a response. It was a carefully planned legal and engineering maneuver. Every step was deliberate, documented, and designed for a specific outcome. This wasn't about revenge. It was about creating an irrefutable legal record, a closing argument made of steel and concrete. The construction phase was a week of intense, focused labor. The power auger I rented bit deep into the earth, pulling up columns of dense clay until I had a shaft 6 feet deep and 18 inches wide. The rebar cage I assembled was a complex work of structural art, designed to absorb and distribute kinetic energy. When the concrete truck arrived, I didn't offer a folksy lie to the driver. I had him sign a form attesting to the delivery of 3 cubic yards of 5,000 PSI commercial-grade concrete for a property security installation. Paperwork was everything. The centerpiece was the 10-foot length of Schedule 80 steel pipe. I sank it 4 feet into the wet concrete, leaving 6 feet exposed. After it cured for a day, I encased the bottom 4 feet of the exposed pipe in a decorative but solid concrete plinth, formed to look like a handsome stone pillar. This served a dual purpose. It added thousands of pounds of additional mass and made the formidable nature of the post visible and obvious. No one could claim they didn't know it was solid. The mailbox itself, my 80-pound custom-fabricated steel box, was the final touch. I had the fabricator stamp a small, discreet plate on the underside custom security fixture, M. Thorn Engineering. I bolted it to the post with hardened steel bolts, torqued to specification. The final product looked like an elegant, albeit very sturdy, country mailbox. It was forest green. It was, in all visible respects, compliant with the aesthetic Brenda so cherished. It was also, in every practical sense, a piece of anti-vehicular fortification. On Saturday morning, I finished the last details and retreated to my porch with a cup of coffee and a clear view. The bait was set. It took less than an hour. Brenda's SUV did its customary slow drive-by. A flurry of activity on the community forum followed. Her post was a masterpiece of hysterical indignation, calling for an emergency on-site ACC meeting at noon to deal with the monstrous, unapproved structure I had erected. She invited all residents to attend and show solidarity in protecting our community standards. She was summoning an audience for her own immolation. At 5 minutes to noon, the parade began. A dozen cars parked along the road, their occupants spilling out, a murmuring crowd of the curious and the complicit. Brenda and Gary arrived last, flanked by their 2 bored cronies. Gary, with a theatrical flourish, pulled a new, heavy-duty sledgehammer from the bed of his truck. He was grinning, anticipating a moment of glorious, righteous destruction. They marched up my driveway, a self-important little posse. Thorn Brenda screeched, her voice trembling with rage. "This is your final notice. You were sent a cease and desist, and you respond with this insult. That thing is a monstrosity, and it is coming down now." I rocked gently in my chair, Buster letting out a low rumble from his spot at my feet. "That letter, Brenda, also informed you that you were to have no contact with me. You are currently trespassing, and so is your demolition crew. We are the HOA. We have the authority," she shrieked. Gary stepped forward, hefting the sledgehammer. "Last chance. Thorn, move, or I'll move this piece of junk myself." I gave a slight nod. "Go ahead. Gary, give it your best shot." He took the invitation. With a grunt, he swung the sledgehammer in a powerful arcing blow aimed squarely at the side of the mailbox. The resulting sound was not the gratifying crumple of cheap metal. It was a deafening, resounding clang that vibrated through the air, causing birds to burst from the nearby trees. The steel head of the hammer bounced off the mailbox as if it had struck a battleship's hull. The kinetic energy, with nowhere to go, was reflected back up the handle, ripping the hammer from Gary's grasp. He staggered backward, his face a comical mask of shock and pain, his arms shaking uncontrollably as if he'd been electrocuted. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The mailbox was pristine. Not a dent, not a scratch. "What? What the hell is that thing?" one of the board members whispered in horror. Brenda's face had gone slack with disbelief. The fury was replaced by a dawning, terrifying confusion. I stood up and walked calmly toward them, holding my phone. "That, Brenda, is a mailbox. More specifically, it's a passive, static, property defense fixture. the design of which I discussed at length with my attorney to ensure full compliance with state and local laws regarding property protection. I turned my attention to Gary, who was still nursing his vibrating hands. Gary, 2 days ago, a judge granted my request for a temporary restraining order against you, based on your recorded threats against my livestock. You were served the papers yesterday afternoon. By coming onto my property today, you have just violated a court order. That's a criminal offense. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. Brenda looked at her husband, her eyes wide with panic. Furthermore, I continued, my voice steady and clear. This entire assembly has been recorded. Your attempt to destroy my property, after receiving a legal order to cease and desist, constitutes felony vandalism, all in front of more than a dozen witnesses. I then turned to the other 2 board members. And for you two, and the rest of the board, my lawyer will be filing a lawsuit on Monday morning, naming the HOA and each board member individually for breach of fiduciary duty, willful harassment, and gross negligence. Your directors' and officers' insurance policy likely has a clause that voids coverage in cases of intentional, malicious acts. I'd suggest you find your own legal counsel, because Brenda's actions have exposed all of you to significant personal liability. The 2 board members looked at Brenda as if seeing her for the first time not as a leader, but as a massive liability. One of them began to back away slowly. I wasn't finished. I addressed the crowd of onlookers. For months, this woman and her husband have been waging a campaign against me. They have slandered me on your community forum, filed false and harassing reports with the sheriff, and vandalized my property multiple times, all because I didn't fit their narrow, sterile vision for this neighborhood. All I wanted was to live here in peace. In the distance, the sound of an approaching siren began to cut through the stunned silence. That, I said, looking directly at Gary, will be the sheriff's deputies, responding to my call about you violating your restraining order. Brenda finally broke. A choked, strangled sob escaped her lips. The Queen's public unraveling was complete. Her power, built on a foundation of intimidation and petty rules, had crumbled to dust the moment it met an object with genuine, unyielding substance. Her little kingdom was gone, demolished not by a sledgehammer, but by her own hubris and the simple, relentless application of logic, law, and superior engineering. The resolution was not a single, dramatic event, but a logical and systematic dismantling of the Dixons' reign. Gary's arrest for violating the restraining order was quiet and humiliating. Faced with video, audio, and a dozen eyewitnesses, his legal position was non-existent. He was convicted, receiving probation and a permanent restraining order that made living in Oak Creek untenable. The lawsuit against the HOA moved forward, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of personal bankruptcy. The other board members quickly turned on Brenda. An emergency meeting was called, and she was removed from her position as president and from the board entirely. The HOA's new counsel advised them to settle, which they did. The settlement covered my legal fees, the cost of the damages, and a significant contribution to a local equine rescue charity in Willow's name. It was a public and binding acknowledgement of their wrongdoing. Stripped of her power and facing social and financial ruin, Brenda became a ghost in her own perfect house. The community she had ruled with an iron fist now shunned her completely. Within 6 months, a for sale sign appeared on the Dixons' manicured lawn. With a new, reasonable board in place, I worked with them to rewrite the most draconian of the CC&Rs. We drafted rules based on common sense and mutual respect, not on the aesthetic whims of one person. The neighborhood began to breathe again. People started talking to each other, waving as they passed by. The oppressive tension that had lingered in the air was gone. My life at the ranch settled into the peaceful rhythm I had always dreamed of. Willow gave birth to a healthy, spirited foal I named Justice. My days were filled with the simple, satisfying work of building a life, not a fortress. Every morning, when I walk down the long driveway to get my mail, I place a hand on the cool, solid steel of the box. It stands there, unwavering, a silent testament to the fact that peace sometimes requires a well-engineered defense. It's a reminder that the strongest structures are built on a foundation of reason, and that true community isn't about forced uniformity, but about the quiet, unyielding strength to stand up for what is right. My forever home was finally, truly, at peace.